Subcommittee will come to order. Let me say good morning and welcome to today's hearing. This morning we are examining the international food assistance programs that are funded by our subcommittee. Within USDA, food assistance and agricultural development are provided by the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program and the Food for Progress Program. Within USAID, food assistance funding is provided by the Food for Peace Title II program. We have two witnesses to help us understand all aspects of these programs, from the 30,000-foot view of strategic planning to the on-the-ground realities of project execution. I'd like to welcome Ken Isley, the Administrator of the Foreign Agriculture Service at USDA, and Trey Hicks, Director of the Office of Food for Peace at USAID. I want to welcome both of you to our subcommittee. These programs under each of your purview are multifaceted, and they cover much more than just food assistance and agricultural development. We look forward to hearing about what you do, how you do it, and how we can help you to achieve your future goals. I thank both of you for being here, and I look forward to a robust discussion about these very, very important programs. Now, before we begin, I recognize that we're here this morning to discuss the operations and the implementation of USDA and USAID international food assistance programs, but I would be remiss if I did not bring up the lack of support for these programs from the current administration. As I've said before, the administration's proposed elimination of these programs is short-sighted, and it ignores their value as an essential tool for our country's diplomacy. That's why the House MARC rejects the proposed elimination and instead funds McGovern-Dole and Food for Peace at $2 billion, well above last year's enacted level. Now, moving on, while the various goals for each of these programs may differ, their overall mission is the same: alleviate hunger, improve food security around the world. It's my hope that today's discussion will help shed light on how these programs achieve their missions, what are the various challenges they face, and how you measure success. Additionally, while today we're discussing food assistance and these programs, they're not the only tools the United States has at its disposal for combating food insecurity around the globe. I'm also interested in how these programs fit within a broader national strategy for international food assistance. Our farmers, our ranchers, our producers don't just feed Americans. We help feed the world. The commodities that we send abroad are a gift from the American people, and it is our duty to ensure this generosity is treated with great care to make the most positive impact around the world that we can possibly make. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. I look forward to today's discussion. Now let me ask our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry, if he has any opening remarks, or should I just recognize him for some opening remarks?
The answer is yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me and for holding this important hearing. The chairman and I had to discuss the possibility of bringing in the directors of the multiple food assistance programs and policies that we have across our government. And so I think I'm grateful to you all for coming today, but really especially grateful for the chairman's leadership in this regard. I don't think this is a well-understood space by the American people, and yet it is essential to well-being throughout the world. So again, thank you for coming and your leadership. But I think it's important at the start of the hearing to point out the United States does lead the world, both in terms of generosity and outreach. That includes agricultural and humanitarian assistance. And I think it's not only necessary to point that out because it compels us to examine how effective these programs are, but also the underlying premise. Despite any temporary disagreement with another nation or trade dispute, countries all around the world turn to us because of our leadership and capacity and generosity. America's ability to help other people in need and the generosity of the people that we serve are really a hallmark of who we are. It marks the character of us as a nation. Regarding international food assistance, many of us have worked in this space for a very long time, and we often hear that this is actually 1%, less than 1% of the overall federal budget. But for our Appropriations Committee, it represents 8%, so it's a significant portion of what we are dealing with and therefore a priority. So as a part of our oversight of these programs, we have to do two things at once. Look at the management of the programs, but also, and this is very important, how do we also think innovatively? How do we attack the sources of structural poverty and overcome misery in the world so that we can create stability in other countries and even the possibility of flourishing for communities and other persons? It's about possibilities, the possibilities of innovation and new approaches that we also have to have a marked focus on as a part of our oversight efforts. This hearing is a great way for us to step back and provide some reflection on just what the purpose of these programs are, how successful they are, but also what are the metrics? How do we measure outcomes to meet these fundamental goals? Also, how are they reconcilable with other programs? Are we unnecessarily duplicating? Why one program is embedded in one agency versus another, and how those agencies collaborate. Our ultimate goal is to, again, create the conditions in which persons can have lives filled with opportunity and hope, and that we can do our part to build more just and good societies, because again, that's who we are, that's our humanitarian impulse, but it's also critical to international stability and therefore our own security. So I believe that this vision and goal should continue to be a part of the evolving of our entire foreign policy and defense policy in Congress. They're inextricably intertwined. That, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much again for holding this committee, and I yield back.
Okay, let me now recognize our distinguished guests for brief oral statements, and then we will proceed with questions. Without objection, gentlemen, your entire written testimonies will be included in the record, and you may proceed in any order which you may decide.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the international food assistance programs implemented by USDA. Before I address this topic, however, I first want to thank the subcommittee for your continued support of my agency, the Foreign Agricultural Service. USDA administers 3 international food assistance programs: the Food for Progress program, the McGovern-Dole program, and a subset of that being the local and regional food aid procurement program. Food for Progress has 2 principal objectives: to improve agricultural productivity in developing countries and emerging democracies without negatively impacting the export of U.S. commodities, and to expand trade in agricultural products. Donated U.S. commodities are shipped to recipient countries and sold on the local market. The proceeds are used to support agricultural and infrastructure capacity building projects. Project implementers, including PVOs, foreign governments, universities, and intergovernmental organizations. At the end of fiscal year 2018, there were 52 active Food for Progress projects valued at over $1 billion. For fiscal year 2019, USDA announced preliminary allocations for 7 multi-year projects in Africa, Asia, and Central America, totaling nearly $140 million. As an example, a Food for Progress project in East Timor helps support the export of local crops and creates economic opportunities for subsistence farmers. The project's first harvest of fair-traded certified coffee will commence in 2019 with more than 19 tons headed for international buyers, including many U.S. importers. McGovern-Dole provides school meals and nutrition programs for school-aged children, women, and infants in countries with high food insecurity. Projects are implemented by PVOs and international organizations, and the program's statutory objectives include reducing hunger, improving literacy and primary education, and carrying out maternal, infant, and child nutrition programs. McGovern-Dole projects are designed to graduate from USDA assistance. For fiscal year 2019, USDA announced preliminary funding allocations for 9 proposals in Africa, Asia, Central America, and the Caribbean, valued over $190 million. McGovern-Dole projects reached over 4.3 million beneficiaries in fiscal year 2018. As an example, in 2018, Kenya became the first country in Africa to transition all schools previously supported by McGovern-Dole to a government-supported national school meal program. First authorized in the 2014 Farm Bill, the local and regional procurement program provides a complementary mechanism for delivering international food assistance. Including local commodities such as fruits and vegetables improves the taste of nutritious meals, strengthens supply chains, and boosts local support for sustainability. In fiscal year 2019, USDA LRP projects are estimated to reach more than 105,000 children in McGovern-Dole schools. As an example, a recent LRP project incorporated sweet potatoes into school meals in Mozambique. From selecting countries and priorities to reviewing proposals, monitoring agreements, evaluating project performance, and reporting progress, FAS staff coordinate with colleagues across USDA and the U.S. government, particularly USAID, as well as with donors, ag industry stakeholders, implementing partners, U.S. land-grant universities, and recipients. Collaboration does not just occur in Washington, D.C. We also work closely with our overseas posts to select priority countries and themes for food assistance and to implement the programs. And last, collecting evidence on effectiveness of food aid is an important part of the administration of these programs. In recent years, FAS has strengthened our monitoring and evaluation systems. We adhere to a results-oriented management approach. We invest in independent research of our learning agendas, which serve as 5-year strategies used to prioritize areas to improve the programs. To share our research and to fulfill our strong commitment to transparency, we publicly post evaluations of food aid projects implemented by FAS on USAID's public portal for monitoring and evaluation. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Isley. Mr. Hicks.
Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Fortenberry, other members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to speak with you today about international food assistance programs. My name is Trey Hicks, and I'm the director of the Office of Food for Peace, the world's largest provider of international food assistance. Last year, we reached 76 million people in 59 countries with life-saving aid. We do this because alleviating global hunger represents the best of America's generosity and goodwill. It's also crucial to our national security. Where hunger persists, instability grows. Our efforts help build a more stable world and ensure people have the chance to lead more productive lives. More than 80% of our programs respond to humanitarian crises by providing food assistance to people affected by conflict and natural disasters. We also have multi-year development programs that address the root causes of hunger, such as drought, to build resilience and food security among vulnerable populations. This helps equip people with the knowledge and tools to feed themselves and reduce the need for future international assistance. There are 4 main ways that USAID provides life-saving food assistance. Number 1, food grown in the United States through Title II. Number 2, food grown locally or regionally. Number 3, through food vouchers. And finally, number 4, through money that helps families buy food on local markets. Many times and often, there's a combination of these modalities that we use for each and every response based on the context unique to those responses. For today's testimony, I will focus on U.S. in-kind food assistance, food bought with Title II funds and authorized in the Food for Peace Act, which this subcommittee has jurisdiction over. The other modalities are primarily provided through the International Disaster Assistance or Development Assistance funds authorized under the Foreign Assistance Act. When we purchase and deliver U.S. commodities, we work with two types of partners: non-governmental organizations like Catholic Relief Services and international organizations like the World Food Program. These partners choose from a set of approved U.S. commodities, and then Food for Peace evaluates the offers and buys the commodities on the open market through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. After that, cargo is shipped from a U.S. port to the recipient country. Upon arrival, the food goes to the people in greatest needs: children under 5, pregnant and lactating women, the elderly, and other vulnerable populations. Our help is needed now more than ever. For the first time in decades, the number of hungry people is rising. More than 820 million people do not have enough food to eat. That's 1 in every 9 people on the planet. Conflict is the largest factor and compounded by natural disasters like drought. As a result, today's crises in places like Syria, South Sudan, Venezuela, and Yemen, they're bigger, they last longer, they're more complex. In partnership with Congress, we must constantly find ways to be more coordinated, creative, and efficient in our responses. In Yemen, conflict has left nearly 17 million people in urgent need of food assistance, more than the total population of both Georgia and Nebraska combined. If the situation gets worse, famine may occur. This fiscal year, USAID has helped feed 11 million people in Yemen by providing food assistance, including 450,000 metric tons of food. We have provided wheat, beans, and vegetable oil from the United States. That is saving lives every single day. Additionally, 1 million Rohingya refugees live in Bangladesh, where they have formed the world's largest refugee settlement after fleeing violence in Burma. The U.S. helps feed roughly 700,000 Rohingya every year. One of the ways we help is providing American-made therapeutic food. This peanut-based paste is very effective. If a child is malnourished, parents take them to a health center where they feed their children a packet a day and watch them grow healthy and strong. I was in Bangladesh earlier this year, and I saw at one clinic a whiteboard that tracked how many kids that were helped at that clinic. 2 years ago, this clinic alone was treating 1,000 malnourished kids a month. Today, they're down to 200. Our program is making a difference. USAID does not do this work alone. As Administrator Mark Greene has said, tackling hunger requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. We work alongside America's farmers, mariners, affected governments, other donors, NGOs, and the international community. We also coordinate within the U.S. government. We work with the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugee, and Migration on overseas refugee issues. The U.S. Department of Agriculture helps us procure Title II food. Our development activities are an essential component of the Feed the Future initiative led by USAID's Bureau of Food Security. Most frequently, we work alongside the Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance responding to humanitarian emergencies. We provide food while they provide other needs like shelter, medical care, and water. The forthcoming USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance will bring our offices together, creating a more strategic, seamless approach to delivering both food and non-food in humanitarian crises. In our 65 years, Food for Peace has helped to end hunger for more than 4 billion people. That legacy would not have been possible without congressional support, including from this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, both of you. Let me just make an announcement. Our chairwoman, Ms. Lowe, we anticipate her arrival at any moment, and while we will begin our questioning, when she comes, I will give her the respect of allowing her to make some opening statement at her pleasure. But let me begin the questioning. Mr. Isley and Mr. Hicks, you have, your agencies have provided food assistance around the world for more than 50 years. Can you each take a moment to give us a sense of the global picture of food insecurity today? And then just tell us, in that context, what the biggest challenges are that face both of your programs. And since I have but 5 minutes, I'd like for both of you, as I understand it, the common mission that you have of alleviating hunger and improving food security provides different ways of achieving the mission, but the largest cost driver for both of you is transportation. And so could you also just take a moment to discuss how your programs are addressing the cost drivers and how the FAS and USAID work together to achieve efficiencies in those areas, and what challenges remain?
Excellent question. It's something that we think every day about, some of these challenges on the cost drivers. Overall, there's over 100 million people around the world that require emergency food assistance, and we're feeding about 76 million of those. It's a huge effort. When it comes to the landscape, we are increasingly responding to very complex political crises where there's conflict, there's war. It's becoming increasingly difficult to get food to the people that need it most. When it comes to the transportation, we do work very closely with USDA when it comes to all the pieces of getting the food from the U.S. ports to the beneficiary, and we're constantly looking for efficiencies. So, for example, we have a pilot program on tracking the commodities using the quick reference codes, just to have an easier way to make sure that the bags are getting to where they need to go in each step of the process, as one example. But we are, every single dollar we save in efficiencies for transportation, for example, it's another dollar we can feed right back into the program and feed more people. So it's something we take seriously. We look at it every day. But
okay. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, and to address the first part of your question, there certainly is not a lack of opportunities in the world in terms of these programs and our ability to select priority countries and the number of proposals we receive to actually enact the programs. In terms of challenges, let me address them kind of separately, depending on the program. In Food for Progress, one of our key challenges is to meet the 70% cost recovery requirement as we monetize the commodities. This can be challenging in countries where some of the U.S. commodities aren't as price competitive, and also when you take into account the shipping costs that we incur to get the commodities to the country to monetize. Also for us, and it highlights your issue on transportation, we deal in Food for Progress with a $40 million transportation cap that has been flat for over a decade. Now, this subcommittee did appropriate an additional $6 million for transportation in fiscal year 19, which will provide us more flexibility. Both of our programs are subject to the U.S. cargo preference, which requires at least 50% of ocean-going cargo generated by our programs to be transported by U.S. flag, privately owned commercial vessels. This requirement increases our cost of transportation significantly and reduces the amount of commodities that they therefore were able to supply. Competition for U.S. vessels is limited, with only 3 major U.S. carriers participating in the program, and we estimate those costs are roughly 200% higher than the foreign cargo rates. Specific to McGovern-Dole, getting host country buy-in is a significant challenge we have, and actually implementing programs in very remote locations is a challenge. We're serious about the graduation requirement and objectives under this program, and we work hard with those host countries to ensure that that graduation occurs. And I would concur with my colleague, Mr. Hicks, on the close collaboration between USDA and USAID to try to address these challenges, particularly in cargo preference. Our staff are meeting constantly to see if there are opportunities to ship cargo together for our multiple programs and therefore reduce cost.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Fortenberry for any questions that he may like to have in this first round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we all agree on the mission and goal. This is, again, about America's humanitarian impulse. We also help create stability in far-off places, and that's, again, inextricably intertwined with national security. So we agree on that. The broad architectural question, though, here is our policy response the right construct for this era? Now, what happens in government is somebody has a good idea and we respond to it. It creates a policy and a program that gets embedded in an institution, a department, then carries a sort of infrastructure with it into time, and those of us who come along have to pick that up. But again, we've got to go back and continue to re-examine, is this the right and best response? Is your construct the proper one for our modern time? Is, in USDA, is USAID's construct the proper one? And you mentioned the merging of the Food Security Office and the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. I think you said that. So again, that's an attempt to start to rethink how a more effective response is necessary in modern time. So you also mentioned, Director Isley, that you're not just doing this program embedded in the Foreign Agricultural Service on behalf of Food for Peace, as well as Food for Progress, or Government Dole, I should say, and Food for Progress. You're also working with other partners, which include land-grant institutions, the agricultural industry itself, individual donors. Where we sit, again, touching this along with many other things, it's important to me for you all to talk about the full spectrum of activities that are going on in this space, because it ties back to whether or not our policy construct is the best and most appropriate one, and you're seeing movement to change certain things. And one other idea before I stop, I'll let you answer that if you can briefly. For instance, OPIC, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, has gone through a new phase of development, which they're shifting to a new model of development finance around equity finance. Does this have implications for Food for Progress? Rather than monetizing commodity that then pays for a particular type of project, can that combine with other private players who will hold a piece of equity, and we can leverage that for 10, 20 more times the impact? It's this type of creative thinking, again, that can provide a new architecture on the mission that we all agree with. So I'd like to give you a moment to respond to that.
Sure, and thank you, Congressman Fortenberry, for the question. Similar to USAID, we also are looking at our organizational structure and are implementing some transformation change, and we are including these programs in a program area with our trade promotion programs as well to pick up the full continuum. These programs don't sit alone and can be very complementary to programs that you're fully aware of, like Cochrane and Borlaug and others, to provide educational training and assistance and coordinate more with our universities. I always think there's room for creativity and looking at, is there a better way to implement? And it gets down to communication and coordination. It gets down to having experienced staff and continuing their development and expertise and how they interact with all the other providers to deliver the programs in the most effective and efficient way. So we're driving that communication not just with USAID at the more senior level and at the staff level, but across U.S. government broadly, and getting more embedded with our implementing partners like World Food Program, like Catholic Relief Services, and some of the industry partners. Land O'Lakes is coming up with some creative programs.
It would be nice to see an inventory of all of these components, because I think that would be helpful to give a bigger picture, because it's hard to do, particularly here. Let me stop right quick. What about this idea of a country ag leader, a country ag coordinator? Maybe they're embedded in the Foreign Agricultural Service, particularly in Feed the Future countries, that then sets up metrics. It's my understanding that Feed the Future country have 50 to 100 metrics of outcomes. Well, there's really ought to be two. You know, are we stopping child stunning and getting to the heart of structural poverty issues? And secondly, what we call yield gap analysis. How well are we doing with the resources that are there? Again, I'm getting ready to run out of time, but I want to use this opportunity to force us to reflect higher and bigger about structural changes that actually are consistent with the mission. I've talked too much again, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, so I'll yield back. We'll come back around.
Well, I can just react to that quickly, Congressman. In terms of our footprint and overseas, we look at that every single year through a global review process. We currently have global attaches, foreign service officers in 93 posts in addition to our local employed staff. Some of those posts serve multiple countries, some of which we're implementing these programs. So we're constantly looking at that. We always have a lead on the USDA side within each of those posts, and they coordinate very closely with their USDA or USAID counterparts and other government officials within those embassies and consulates.
Don't get me wrong, I'm very familiar with the ag attaché, but I'm talking about a next level of leadership on policy. So,
The gentlelady, Ms. McCollum, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing here today. And to my friend, Mr. Thornberry, as the lead Democrat in the House that worked on the Global Food Security Act for many, many years, I was pleased to see that you're here today, the Food for Peace office on the witness list. We're here talking about Food for Peace, of course, and that's the two main types of food assistance under Title II. And the market-based assistance authorized under the Global Food Security Act. I just want to point out in 2016, $7.6 billion, 7.6 billion people suffered from food undernourishment. And since then, we know we've had Syria, troubles continue in South Sudan, Burma, Bangladesh with the Rohingya, and Yemen, all countries that I visited, and you work in other countries too. So we know that that number has only done but increased. And the Emergency Food Security Program that's funded under the International Disaster Assistance account within USAID. Now, I'm going to talk about some accounts here, and I have to do it quick in the amount of time that I have. We know that the President zeroed out in his budget IDEA and Food for Peace. And that's because of this new reprogramming, reorganization, and I understand you're working with the committee on it. But in the meantime, until it happens, you need to know that I'm concerned about the potential for future rescissions and the increasing levels of unobligated fund balances within IDEA and other food assistance accounts. The White House FY20 budget reported an estimated $2 billion of unobligated balances covered over from FY19. And we know that there's hunger in this world. We know where it is. While some carryover is expected, I chair the Interior Committee, and I expect the Secretary to have some carryover. The IDEA account has a total funding level of only $4.4 billion in FY19, meaning half of the money was not spent. Half of the money was not spent to feed hungry people all over the world. To address this, the FY20 Omnibus Bill included report language and bill language stating that the IDEA funds shall be distributed within 60 days of enactment. The FY20 House-passed version of the SFOP shortens this timeline within the bill, and report language requires that IDEA funding be distributed within 30 days. These people are hungry now. The Senate also has concerns in their SFOP draft, which is their state and foreign operations. And that hasn't been to the full committee yet, but it's passed through the subcommittee. And that maintains the 60-day language. It requires report language on strict reporting requirements of unobligated balances. So over the past 2 fiscal years, the House and the Senate have been making it perfectly clear, trying to get your attention, that when we put taxpayers' dollars towards these important programs of saving children from starvation and stunting, that we know that these funds are going to get out the door. So, gentlemen, can you explain to me what's going on here? I'm fully supportive of looking at reprogramming and reorganization. But in the meantime, Congress has appropriated these funds. People are hungry, malnutritious, and starving, and half the fund balance has not been accounted for.
So first of all, thank you for the question. I think, number one, message well received, loud and clear. I think for the way we program, I appreciate your acknowledgement that some carryover is actually necessary for us to have a steady flow of a response. So there needs to be some carryover from year to year, and thank you for acknowledging that.
But not half.
Correct. So, we are constantly trying to ensure that we have stability. When a sudden onset like a Dorian happens, we have to have funds available, and many times we're in between fiscal years and these events happen. We have to have a certain kind of reserve on hold. But I know that some of the budgetary language is being worked out. I assure you, whatever is signed into law, we will faithfully execute. There is no shortage of hunger around the world. Even if we piled up every single penny and in IDA and in Title II and only used it for food.
I only have a minute. So,
oh, sure.
So you're telling me that half the funding that wasn't spent in FY19, it's ready to go out the door? You can submit this to the committee?
No, so I can only speak on the food side. The Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, we share a portion of the IDA account with the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. So they have their own budget process. We're not yet merged into one single Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. So I can't speak on behalf of the entire account because there are carryovers that are attributed to both offices. So some of that is food, some of it's not food, and none of it is Title II, the Title II appropriation.
Mr. Chair, I think we should ask for when this money is going to be spent because, as Mr. Fortenberry pointed out, there are people very hungry, malnourished, and in some cases starving. Thank you.
I'm very happy to provide a more detailed response on kind of the budget flow for the record. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Molinar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here today. I wanted to ask you both a couple questions. You talked a little bit about involvement in conflict areas. I've talked a little bit about places where there are natural disasters. I wonder if you could speak to, kind of how your approach differs in those kind of scenarios, and what are the kind of the challenges you face in each of those kinds of situations?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Molinar. The USDA programs are not designed to be the short-term disaster relief type programs. They're more mid to long-term under the McGovern-Dole and the Food for Progress program. So we're identifying priority countries with similar criteria, but aren't necessarily implementing in some of the most difficult countries from a security standpoint, like USAID and others are more equipped to do. But we are trying to identify those countries where we can come in and provide assistance when the appropriate time is right. And an example of that is like Food for Progress. If you look at our 2019 award, we did award Venezuela, subject on the democratic transition of Venezuela, to go in and provide capacity building work to reestablish some of their agricultural capacity to produce for their own domestic use and for export, and to be an export market for the U.S. as well in the future. So we identify countries that are in difficult circumstances beyond just food security and are able to implement programs in those geographies to provide medium and longer term assistance, not immediate disaster relief. Same way on McGovern-Dole. Obviously, some of these countries also have the biggest challenges with feeding school-age children, and we identify those countries where we can actually effectively implement these programs and implement 3 to 5 year projects to try to raise up the ability and deal with the malnutrition at the school-age level and work with the governments hand in hand to try to get them to transition into providing that support directly.
So just as a quick follow-up, you mentioned Venezuela, because I did notice that. How do you work in a situation, what's happening there right now? I mean, are you able to find partners to work with in Venezuela, or how does that work?
Yes, we have. And it's a partner that's been involved in Venezuela for quite some time and is also partnering with other organizations like IECA that we work with routinely in that region. And it's also through our participation in an interagency process. So we're very involved with State Department, USAID, and others as we look at the full range of assistance and services we can provide at the right moment in Venezuela's transition.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So there are basically three scenarios where Food for Peace operates and responds. Primarily, we are an emergency response. We look at the need and we meet the need on an emergency basis. But one type of response would be a sudden onset, kind of like Hurricane Dorian, where there's an immediate need, there's an immediate disaster, we need to quickly move in to get food to help save lives. We also have more protracted conflict kind of settings, like in Yemen, like in northeast Nigeria, where it's a protracted crisis, where there isn't a political solution that to the underlying problems that's driving the food insecurity. It's a long-term, high-risk environment. And then the third is we have development programs where we look at countries that have recurrent shocks like drought, and we do development programs funded through this committee where we help communities adapt to those recurrent shocks and get them on their journey to self-reliance, which is one of the priorities of Administrator Mark Greene, so they don't have to rely on humanitarian assistance the next time the shock comes by.
And then just as a follow-up, the World Food Program with the UN, how do you coordinate with their efforts?
So we look at every crisis and every activity by itself, and we make a determination whether or not which partner is the right partner. And in the cases where the World Food Program is the best positioned to meet that particular activity, we will enter into an agreement with them, and it's a whole process, whether it's going to be Title II commodities or other types of assistance. But when it comes to how we coordinate on a grander scale, we are actually on the board of the World Food Program, and together with my colleagues from USDA, we go as the U.S. delegation where we have the broader kind of strategic conversations. We also get into their backyard a little bit and tell them how they need to clean up their management issues and better align their accountability with what our standards and expectations are.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Pocan, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks both for being here. If you could also send my greetings to Mark, I would appreciate it, coming from my home state. I would say he's one of my favorite Trump appointees, but I did that when Commissioner Gottlieb was here, and then he resigned a month later, so just tell Mark Greene, hey, please, I would appreciate that. I want to follow up a little bit on the questions about going to tough areas. So back in February, we quit going and doing work in the West Bank and Gaza. And I know that there's been a lot said about, I think 1.1 million people are on food assistance, 95 to 100% of the water is undrinkable. There was a UN report that said by next year, Gaza will be unlivable. I just had a professor in from Gaza who was visiting for a couple of weeks and said that just in the last few weeks, they've had suicide bombings against Hamas police from people who've been radicalized even further because of the situation there. And my concern is, while we had projects going on there around food assistance and other areas, also there's a company in my district that had recently completed a water desalination project and working on a reservoir. They're shuttered, not even opened because the funding went away. Can you give me an update on what other projects have had to be abandoned in that area and what the consequences are, the fallout from those projects stopping in that area?
So first of all, I don't have the full list of programs that were operating in those areas, but I'm happy to provide the details on not just for our programs but all of the USAID programs. But the decision and the policy for West Bank, Gaza, Palestinian territories, they happen in a different kind of different level beyond the humanitarian scope. It's more of a diplomatic, strategic kind of policy. But, as soon as any policy shifts occur, we are constantly vigilant in assessing needs around the world, including in that region. And, we will always follow where the needs are.
Do we still have any staffing with that mission?
That is not something I have an answer for you right now, but I can go to the Middle East Bureau and provide you, for the record, the information.
I'd appreciate that. And I think a follow-up question maybe to them too would be what the situation on the ground, their assessment since that assistance has been pulled. Again, just because I've gotten reports of escalation of what's happening in that area, clearly this is something that we all should be concerned of. And, I'm getting very firsthand reports, including from, like I said, a completed water desalination plant that can't be opened when you've got undrinkable water. We've already put all the money in, and we're just not doing the final step. So I'd appreciate it. Also, in regards to Iraq and Syria and refugees, I really appreciate all the efforts that we do in this area. However, I am concerned that there's no plan beyond the immediate. I'm afraid things could spiral downward in the camps and outside the camps without a plan. So a few questions. What are the short and medium-term plans for returns and resettlement of Iraqi refugees and Syrian internally displaced persons, and how we're engaging with those governments to ensure resettlement is safe and there's employment opportunities and functioning infrastructure, et cetera? And what efforts are there to develop a comprehensive repatriation plan for the 11,000 people that are currently in camps in 58 different countries?
So on the resettlement and repatriation issue, that's not something that's handled by my office. It is something that obviously affects our work, and we do follow, the changing landscape, but it does present particular challenges for how we get our assistance, which is the food side of the equation, how we get our assistance to folks as they're on the move. Mm-hmm. So I don't have, I'm not it's not our office that handles that, but, when it comes to the provision of food, we go where the need is. So whether they're going to be internally displaced, resettled back, as long as there's a food insecurity that we've been able to assess and we have access, we're going to be continuously providing food to the folks with the greatest need.
Appreciate it. And yeah, any information you could get would be much appreciated. I know it's a little beyond your scope, but I thought since you're here, this is a good opportunity to ask those questions. And then finally, I'll just end my final 15 seconds. So the firms in my area, and it's even immediately outside the district, but a lot of my district residents working at, provide a lot of good, especially corn-based dry product. We really appreciate that. Love to have people come and visit those companies anytime. We'd be glad to set up any visits if anyone is in the area. And it gives Mark Greene a chance to go to a Badger or Packer game. So.
With the gentleman's final second, would you yield to Mr. Fortenberry for that final second?
I'm intrigued by your question, particularly regarding the refugee situation in Iraq. I would urge you, I'd like to talk to you privately about this. I have a Northern Iraq security resolution that goes to the heart of this. Went with the director of USAID there last year, along with Sam Brownback. There's some good things happening. Can we chat off on the side?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'm pleased to yield to the former chairman of this subcommittee, the gentleman from Alabama, who is a big supporter of both of these programs and has a great history with them, Mr. Aderholt.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be here, and thanks for your leadership. And thank you both for guests for being here today. And for your testimonies. I want to start out by reiterating a concern that I brought before this subcommittee many times. And I believe that that any type of proposals to reform or eliminate programs that have U.S. commodities and cargo preferences be eliminated or ill-advised. The preferences align with the administration's policy of America First, and the programs have worked successfully since the creation of the programs back in the 1950s. I'd just like for you to explain, why you believe these programs, which I think offer in-kind food assistance that can be very helpful have once again been proposed for elimination?
Sure, I'm very happy to answer that question. So the proposal in the budget request would actually take all humanitarian assistance accounts, whether it's Title II, international disaster assistance, or migration refugee assistance, and merge them into one new account. So in effect, it's not just Title II, but it's also the IDA account and the MRA account that would be eliminated, and this new account would be stood up where all humanitarian assistance would be provided under one account. It would be proposed at $6 billion, and it would do a few things. Number one, it would maintain the U.S. position as a world leader on humanitarian assistance. Number two, it would provide a better flexibility for the program to respond to whatever the conditions are on the ground without artificially favoring one type of response over another. Basically, every year we have a zero-based budget where we look at the needs, we look at all the different types of responses we can have, whether it's Title II or LRP or market-based, and we make the best choice for each and every response. And what this account would do would not set artificial requirements to use one or the other, but allow the facts on the ground to inform whether we use Title II. So in places like Yemen, there is no local market. There are no local regional procurements we can make. We have to use Title II commodities. So, when we say we want to increase flexibility, it's about using whatever's appropriate for each response. South Sudan, Yemen, they're going to be primarily Title II U.S. in-kind commodity type responses under the current situation, and I don't really see that kind of need for U.S. commodities changing anytime soon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would just echo what Director Hicks said. It's more of the consolidation of these programs within USAID, with USDA continuing to provide support as needed based on our expertise and our footprint globally as well. But it addresses some of the challenges, reduces the duplication, and would center it all within USAID.
Well, yeah, I know, I understand that there has to be a combination of things. I just have seen, and when I chaired this subcommittee, there seemed to be a movement to try to eliminate these U.S. commodity and cargo preferences. And I would really hate to see those completely eliminated, because when we go back home as members of Congress and we explain that we are trying to help people, and I think most Americans around the world want to try to be helpful, to feed people that are hungry. I don't know of any American that does not have that thought. However, they do have some concerns about when cash is sent over, but when you send American-grown produce over, or some kind of that's grown and that helps the farmer here and helps the people over there, it's a lot easier sell than saying we're just going to send some cash over. And I understand that sometimes you have to do that. I understand, and there needs to be both. But I can tell you, it's a lot easier. I have to sell this to the American people. This is the money that the American taxpayers' dollars. And so if it's an easier sell, and saying that we're not going to allow farmers to ship their goods and try to help them, and to me it's a win-win situation. It helps the farmer, it's helps the shippers, and it helps the people who receive it. And so I'm just saying that it's really, I think you're treading on very dangerous ground to try to go down that route, because I have so many constituents that their red flags go up when you talk about sending cash or you sending money. But if you're sending some commodities to help feed somebody, then they're much more likely to say, yes, we want to help. So I just tell you that because, like I said, this is the taxpayers' monies that we are spending on this. So I think that needs to be. I see my time is up. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, to both of you, thank you for the great job that y'all do. I want to see if I can focus on Central America. As you know, that's been an issue for the whole country. I was just down there on a CODE with Speaker Pelosi, and we saw the great work that y'all doing, USAID and the other folks, and y'all have come up with a lot of good work. over the years, and we appreciate what y'all do. You know, the bottom line is, as you have this folks coming in from Central America, we have to look at the drivers, why they're coming here. The wall is a 14th century solution. It's not going to stop those people, so we have to go to the root of the problem. And looking at some of the research that y'all done, I mean, you guys are right. For example, some of the key findings that you all have looked at, if you look at data from 166 countries for the last 40 years, it shows you that as long as you have different income levels, the folks from the lower income levels will be coming over here. So as long as we don't help work with those countries, they're going to be coming here. Violence leads to migration. Corruption drives migration. Lack of jobs is another thing. And the strongest economic factors associated with people coming up here have to look at food insecurity. And this is from your own research, and of course, the family's personal economic situation. You all have done a lot of work, including how the coyotes, and I have some of the work that y'all have done, why they come up here, how they advertise, how they use social media. And it's an amazing situation what they do to try to get people over here. The funding that the president wanted to cut was wrong. As you know, he reversed that because we heard it from your folks. This would have been a disaster in Central America if we would have allowed those cuts to happen. Back in 2014, when this started coming up, Congresswoman Kay Ranger, myself, and Congress, we started this program, $750 million. Unfortunately, it's been cut down to about, I think, a little bit over $500 million. So the president was looking at stopping $1.1 billion a few months ago, and I'm glad he reversed and flip-flopped on that position because it would have been the wrong thing to do on this. So my question is, and I know a lot of the success stories, we went to some of the USAID work that y'all did a lot, but we have to do a lot more. And we have put in billions of dollars. And for the billions of dollars that we're putting, what are the results? What else can we do? What else can we leverage to do this? Because we have to go to the root of the problem. So appreciate any insight you can give me. And again, I have everything, what you did for, what you're doing in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. It's wonderful work. We need to do that. And before my time runs out, as you answer the question, I do have a writer here that I wish you guys would respond within the time that's asking you to look at Central America, and this is USAID and of course USDA also, working groups so we can work with them on the agriculture part. So I will ask you to make sure you all fulfill the time to do this. Tell me, what else can we do besides putting more money in Central America?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. We have many active projects within the scope of McGovern-Dole and within the scope of Food for Progress in that region. We also implement Cochrane-Borlaug scientific exchange programs with thought leaders there to improve the capacity of their agricultural industries. One project I'd like to highlight in specific is TechnoServe, our implementing partner in Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Peru, where we're building capacity in cacao and coffee production. That supports 120,000 farmers, 1,200 organizations, and is valued at $47 million to provide that kind of stability. And again, production that benefits the U.S. industries based on the output. So we're continuing to look at opportunities to implement these programs in that region and support the very people you're talking about and improve stability there.
Can you give us an inventory, both of y'all, of what you're all doing there? Again, I'm very supportive, and I want to do more, but if y'all can give me an inventory, because as you know, coffee prices affected the situation. The drought, they have a drought there, so whatever we can help them address that. And a lot of people think people are coming in from the urban areas. But a lot of the folks are coming in, according to your work, are from the rural areas where the agricultural areas are at. So we really need your help. And whatever we need to do to, I know we're at the end of the funding process, but what we can do to put more money into the areas, we need your assistance.
Very good. We'll follow up on the inventory.
And just quickly, so I don't run over the time, but a lot of the programs that you were referencing are handled out of our Latin America Caribbean Bureau. Very happy to provide you inventory information. I'll get that relayed back to you for the record if that's okay. But you did ask how we might improve, and I think it's a good opportunity. You mentioned a lot of data that we collect and we monitor.
Excellent data.
And, the last Farm Bill was passed with an increase in our funding to our data collection type of contract. We have a contract that's called the Famine Early Warning System, and it's where we pull in data from crop yields to rainfall to purchasing power, all the different components to figure out where the food insecurity is. You guys provided us some ability to increase our monitoring evaluation to make sure that that program is at tip-top shape. So you guys are already doing a lot to help us, and I appreciate your referencing to our vigorous data collection, because that's what drives our targeting of our program.
Thank you, and I appreciate both of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Fortenberry for purposes of request for submission to the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And when I have my full 5 minutes, I'll go into this in more detail. This is a letter I wrote to the Comptroller General, the General Accountability Office, regarding what I asked you earlier in terms of a survey of all internationally related food assistance program in our government and internationally. But I'm going to come back to this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, we're certainly a very generous nation, but I have a couple of questions for you. One thing that came up is that in the testimony, there's mention of Venezuela receiving assistance. Is that just for this future fiscal year, if they do democratization, or have they been receiving assistance up till now?
Correct, yeah. It would be for the future year, and it would be contingent on the transition to a democratic government that would meet our satisfaction to release those funds with our implementing partner.
So right now, they're not one of the 38 countries mentioned in your testimony that receive aid?
Correct.
Good. Now, a few years ago, I was in Kakuma in Kenya, and which I understand is one of the countries that receives aid, and visited the camp there, went to the food distribution site, and was a little puzzled to find that they reject U.S. corn for human consumption because it's GMO corn. This is very curious to me because my children eat GMO corn, and I find it a little unusual that a country that asks for USAID would actually reject it because, they don't want their children to eat what my children eat. So of those 38 developing countries in these programs, how many will not accept U.S. corn because it's GMO corn for human consumption?
First of all, I eat GMO every day.
I think almost everyone in this room does, probably.
But I don't have the total number. But I will tell you that we have an amazing, phenomenal ambassador in Rome, who's Ambassador Kip Tom, and it's his job to work on these international agriculture and food assistance issues, and this is on his radar. It's at the top of his list. He is an excellent advocate to try to convince these countries that GMO not only isn't going to hurt you, it could probably help you overcome a lot of the food insecurity and agricultural challenges that are in a lot of these countries. So I feel like we have really good representation right now on this issue. It's not something that I am in my humanitarian capacity do, but with our ambassador, who I coordinate with, and his staff almost daily, it's on his radar, and it's also on the radar of the Bureau of Food Security, which is a sibling bureau to the Humanitarian Bureau. The administrator there, Beth Dunford, it's something that's on her radar too, where she's actively working on this. So very happy to provide the USAID information on which countries have these issues, and I can help direct you to any resource you'd want to talk about this issue.
Well, that's what I'd like to know. I mean, I'd like to know which countries actually will not accept U.S. humanitarian aid of GMO. It's fascinating, because I do in district, we do corn and soybeans, okay? They're GMO, basically. I mean, 88% of corn, 90% of corn is GMO. It's not 100%. But, we're talking about trade, and everybody's criticizing the president. Oh, it's trade, Look, that's a trade. The fact that there are European nations, many European nations, trading partners, who will not who will not accept U.S. GMO corn for human consumption. And I will tell you, because I've had these discussions with some of these parliamentarians, they know this is political. They know there's no scientific background for this. So why aren't we using our aid programs as leverage against these political trade barriers that are put up by these countries?
Well, we do, and it is USDA's job to address some of those barriers, and we do that through these programs and a lot of others. This is an example of them adopting European policies in this area and us continuing to work very hard to reverse that, rebut that. And Food for Progress, for instance, we have several projects in the SPS area, sanitary, phytosanitary, to implement U.S.-based policies, science, data-driven policies, not based on fear or your food or whatever. And it's our people, our attachés, our local employed staff that get a lot of these shipments cleared that may originally face obstacles based on whatever those import barriers are, whether they're GMO or other requirements countries may have that are ill-advised. So we work very hard to get them cleared there, also on the trade side, but also in these programs. And we target Food for Progress, we target Cochrane, Borlaug to try to educate people and to implement well-thought-out programs that not only improve productivity, but also sustainability and a lot of other the benefits of these technologies we see. So I'm passionate. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, corn, soybeans. We use GMOs.
Thank you very much. You know, look, our farmers are the best agricultural producers in the world, using the best technology and have a lot to offer this world. And these obstacles are tremendously frustrating to me. But thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Isley and Mr. Hicks, I would like to return to a subject that Mr. Aderholt touched on and ask you to discuss how your programs ensure that the in-kind contributions support both our farmers at home and the agriculture economies of the recipient countries. Our Authorizing and Appropriations Committee have spent a number of years studying these effects and trying to strike the right balance. In the past, we've heard concerns that the use of the in-kind donation sometimes limits the sustainability and the strength of the local agricultural economy. And I recognize that programs such as the local and regional procurement program have been established to attempt to defray the consequences of in-kind donations, but this is just one of the options in your toolkit to ensure that your programs achieve the ultimate goal of creating self-sustaining agricultural economies in recipient countries. How do you respond to these criticisms of in-kind donations, and how do you address these concerns? And what improvements need to be made to your programs to ensure that in-kind donations advance the local agricultural economy? And tell me whether or not the programs are flexible enough today to do this and still give the pride and the utilization of American-grown products.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we work, first and foremost, we work very closely with our ag industry constituents in terms of these in-kind contributions. We work obviously with our sister agency, AMS, on the procurement of those, as Director Hicks had mentioned. To give you an example, under Food for Progress, we purchased 185,000 metric tons of U.S. commodities comprising soybeans, wheat, rice, and others. So those groups are very interested. Peanuts is another big commodity we supply. So they're very interested and meet with us regularly on that. We also are constantly accepting proposals on what's qualified under these programs to supply and expanding that list based on our technical criteria. In terms of impact, some of the criticism really is on the Food for Progress program as the monetization of those. So one of our requirements is we have to do economic analysis of potential disruption of local economies and local markets. We take that very seriously. Our Office of Global Analysis does those economic analysis and could substantiate the low to negative or no impact from the supply, and the actual commodities are chosen on that basis as well. And we take those projects in turn under Food for Progress and use the proceeds to actually build capacity there. So instead of negative consequences, there's actually positive consequences. I mentioned cacao and coffee projects. There's also the regulatory SPS projects. We've got a poultry project where we're developing feed and productivity improvements to the poultry industry in Tanzania. So there's multiple positive benefits to the countries, but we're always cautious about economic impact from the supply of the commodities.
And I would echo that. We are required under Title II to do what's called, which you're probably familiar with, the Bellman determination. It's a constant monitoring of the economic impact. You know, when we are the largest provision of food aid, bringing in large amounts of food can sometimes cause some imbalances on the local economies. So we take a lot of care to make sure that we are looking at all the right indicators. We're doing market analysis. We have partner reporting requirements on this particular issue from their point of view. We also have a lot of field deployed staff who are monitoring local markets. So we take it very seriously. It's a very important piece of the Food for Peace Act and the requirements that are in the legislation. And we adjust our response accordingly when we find that there's an imbalance.
Thank you. We have been joined by the distinguished lady from New York, the chairwoman of the Full Appropriations Committee. She has had a busy schedule this morning, but I announced earlier that when she arrived, we would defer to her. And the gentlelady has arrived, and I am pleased to recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Loy, for whatever time she may take and for whatever questions she may like.
I do want to thank the distinguished chair for that very generous introduction. We're trying to get our work done, and there are several appropriations hearings at the same time. So thank you, and thank you to our distinguished minority for your generosity. I appreciate it. So let me welcome you. I'm sure you've been adequately welcomed. Mr. Isley from USDA, Mr. Hicks from USAID. And again, I apologize because I was looking forward to hearing from you with your very important presentation. From the perspective of this subcommittee and as chairwoman of the Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations, it really is important that we provide responsive assistance in emergencies and that when possible, we ensure this aid complements the longer-term development programs. Providing humanitarian support to those in need, in addition to promoting resilience and sustainable economic growth, is critical to global stability and national security. The distinction between food aid and longer-term food assistance is important in my judgment, and I am sorry that I missed your very eloquent, informative testimony, but I did kind of read it quickly before. A couple of questions. Mr. Hicks, can you please describe how USAID Food for Peace efforts in areas where there is prolonged need for food differ from those supported by development initiatives like Feed the Future that promote longer-term food security? Now, if you've already answered these questions, and my staff is giving them to me again, I apologize. So I'm assuming you didn't have them. If you can please respond, and to what degree does Food for Peace programming intersect with Feed the Future programming, if at all?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's a good enough question to answer twice, so, but this is my first time to address it. But so Food for Peace is indeed integrated with Feed the Future. We are part of the Global Food Security Strategy that was required under the Global Food Security Act. And we are increasingly becoming more coordinated with the Bureau of Food Security and the Feed the Future initiative. Our job is to address the root causes of hunger. We target the most vulnerable. We work in our development programs that's funded by this subcommittee. We improve agriculture. We improve livelihoods, maternal and child health, women's empowerment, disaster risk reduction. And what we're doing is we're helping these communities adapt to the recurrent shocks. And then we program alongside Feed the Future, who will come in behind us, and once these communities graduate from the need for humanitarian assistance, Feed the Future will come in and not only help them thrive with their own self-reliance, but also get access to markets and value chains. And I actually saw this with my own eyes when I was in northern Kenya a couple of years ago. There was a community that was needing humanitarian assistance for drought. We did a Work for Assets program funded by this committee, and we were able to provide food in exchange for the creation of a water canal. Feed the Future came in behind us, used that water canal to help them with agricultural development. Now they're feeding themselves, and they're connected to value chains, and they've graduated from our program. So that's one example. We're doing it in Sahel. We're going to be doing it in Haiti. We're working alongside, integrated in Feed the Future with the Global Food Security Strategy, with the Resilience Strategy, and with the new redesign where we're transforming USAID and bringing these bureaus together. We're creating a humanitarian bureau that's going to be a sibling bureau to the Resilience Food Security Bureau to even bring tighter integration.
I just want to pursue that for a minute, because what I have wondered about, are there measures in place to ensure that funding for these programs is complementary and not duplicative?
That is an excellent question. So our primary focus on the emergency side, we are the first responders on the emergency side. We are the lead for providing emergency food assistance. On the development side, we have a different target, a different kind of angle for addressing the root causes. So we're doing the root causes of hunger. We're working with communities that have recurrent shock. And Food for Peace, they're working many times at a systems level, at a national level, or they're working with families that are further along that journey to self-reliance that Administrator Greene talks about. These are like the entrepreneurs, the producers. So we start at the beginning of the journey, and then we pass it off for them to take it off to the further development. So we're working at the most vulnerable portion of that.
So just continue that a bit, because in protracted scenarios, how does it work?
So in protracted scenarios, because there is such a high degree of conflict and instability, there aren't opportunities for development. And if there are, it's very on the margins. If there aren't the persistent rule of law and safety and security, markets aren't going to happen.
Right.
So, like, for example, in Northeast Nigeria, it is completely unsafe for free markets, for rule of law. There aren't those opportunities, but we are monitoring the situation. So when there are opportunities on the margins and it makes sense to make those investments, we will be working with Feed the Future to take advantage of those if the landscape changes.
And in areas where vouchers are used, and particularly in settings where food aid is required for prolonged periods, just tell me how programs are being designed, because I know how difficult it is.
So on vouchers and other means to use local markets, there really isn't a one-size-fit-all. We look at the availability of infrastructure, the availability of markets for each individual response, and we design our response according to what is there. So in Jordan, where it's a middle-income country where there's thriving markets, we use many times debit cards. At local markets, there's a very high number of urban refugees spread out over the entire city, all these cities. It's impossible to find each one and give them a bag of wheat, and there's this thriving market, so it's more effective to use that kind of credit card system. And other places where there isn't electronic banking, we will sometimes use paper vouchers. And there's systems in place to monitor that and then to ensure that those vouchers are being used by the right beneficiaries. Sometimes we use biometrics, photo IDs, other methods, but every context is different, and we have to kind of build out from whatever is available there and what the dangers and the risks are for each.
Now, I'd also appreciate your views with respect to branding. Is food aid from the United States generally branded with USAID marking?
Absolutely. So when it's commodities, whether it's U.S. commodities or local regional commodities, the USAID logo is very prominently displayed on the bags, on the containers, on the packaging. If it's a debit card, like used in Jordan, the logo's on that card. If it's on the voucher paper, it's on the paper. If it's a work for food work site, there's a sign, prominent display. When I was in northern Kenya, I saw the sign right next to the canal. It's very evident. And we also use messaging through like radio and other types of public messaging as well.
Thank you very much. I won't take advantage of your generosity anymore, but I really appreciated this, and I apologize because there's another hearing next door. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. We are always delighted to have you come and to bring your insight and your wisdom, and we appreciate that very much. At this time, I'll be happy to yield to Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Chair, if I can say, even though you didn't have the benefit of the fullness of the hearing earlier, your questions were absolutely precisely what was needed at this point in the hearing. So thank you. That's a great contribution.
Thank you, my friend.
And especially the last one as well, the branding, and that's well answered. I think this is very important, particularly what Congressman Aderholt was also saying, that we have to tell our story, and no one else will. I'm going to be abstract for a moment more, then we're going to go to some specifics. The letter that I have sent to the General Accountability Office asks for a mapping strategy. This is basically the language. Develop a comprehensive map of all United States and international food-related agencies and programs, and share that with Congress in the next 180 days. It won't be quite that fast. You said you do your own analysis of global food programming. Maybe we can have another conversation about that. But I think you can understand my intention trying to push this, because I worry about the issue of fragmentation. Very helpful to hear that the Global Food Security Act is one of the compelling factors of helping you all integrate Feed the Future and your other emergency assistance programs, how those build upon one another. That's very helpful feedback. But if you simply do a survey off the back of the envelope survey, I mean, we have USAID and USDA with long-term structural missions, emergency missions, long-term development missions, and overlap. We have university systems. You mentioned Borlaug program out of Iowa as well, extraordinary work that they do. We have the Food for Peace program, McGovern Dole, Food for Progress. On the international stage, the World Food Program, the biggest UN agency in this humanitarian space, which America leads, by the way. You mentioned the ambassador that we have to the UN missions in Rome, most of which are agriculture related. We give money to the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Nobody is even aware of what it does. U.S. Africa Development Foundation. The Food and Agricultural Organization, founded in post-World War II in Rome. How are we integrated with them? And by the way, China has now taken the leadership of the FAO. Now tell me what that means. Give me an answer. How much does China give away in humanitarian assistance each year? Can you get right off the top of your head? You don't have to answer. It's a rhetorical question.
I don't think there's any.
I asked the Secretary of State this, and he had a dumbfounded, stumped look. I said, Mr. Secretary, it's not meant for an answer, because who knows? And it's probably about as close to zero as you get. One of the largest economies in the world, and now leadership of one of the main organizations for agricultural development, agricultural policy, and to some degree food assistance, is being headed by a country that does no lifting in this regard. So again, back to the original intent of what I was talking about. This is an important mission for us. It is not well understood in terms of the global communities, in terms of America's generosity in creating conditions for stability in the global community. It's not understood by most Americans. This is part of the reason why, again, taking a step back and surveying everything that we're doing and assuring that it's properly integrated, that we're not just moving old things forward in time, but that we're actually creating innovation in this space for the 21st century is absolutely necessary for this committee to be in front of. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for including this in the record. Haiti. So Congressman Molinar, who was here earlier, and I traveled to Haiti last year at the request of an NGO who you help underwrite, Director Hicks. They do extraordinary work among the poorest of the poor. So we go to the hurricane-ravaged areas. We look at some special projects they've been involved in. We run into people that are developing solar down there, Americans, young American people, probably in some way funded by you all as well. We also met with a group of business people who, all of them could move their businesses out of Haiti, but they're good Haitians who want to do the right thing for their own people. Haiti's market has been disrupted by this problem with the Dominican Republic. It is, in some ways, a non-functioning market because of the problem of the, I'd say, black market flow of goods and the disruption of the ability for the Haitian market to function properly. Anyway, the point being, Haiti can't even provide enough coffee production for its own needs, much less the potential of what it could be for a huge export opportunity for the people there. So we looked at that southern area there, the potential for a co-op in partnership with that business community who does not have the ability of initial capital leverage, which we could provide, maybe even in concert with, again, the Development Finance Organization of OPIC, on and on and on. That becomes then a project that's scalable to meet not just the emergency needs in ravaged areas, but then the type of Feed the Future, Global Food Security Act thinking for long-term sustainability. How are we going to get to this? I mean, it's ripe with potential out there. But I just want to make sure that we're all thinking innovatively and in solidarity together about what can be versus getting caught up in what a lot of times we do, just managing what is. Now, we're doing both and here, and I appreciate that. And I've done it again. I've taken my full 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman, without letting them respond. What am I supposed to do? I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we've heard about Wisconsin and Iowa, but Mr. Borlaug is a Golden Gopher from the University of Minnesota. So I just wanted to set the record straight on that. We're all proud of him, and he's saved many, many lives. Everybody here today knows that we're witnessing record numbers of forcibly displaced people around the world. Displaced people, refugees, asylum seekers, we're experiencing them right here at our borders. June 2019, the UN Refugee Agency put the number at a devastating 70.8 million people around the world. Rising global conflicts, which Mr. Hicks has spoken to, regional instability, you're well aware of extreme weather and climate events are directly linked to food insecurity. But in Central America, and I'm using a World Bank statistic, 20 million people in Central America are displaced by climate change. And it's brought on because they've been experiencing serious drought conditions since 2014. And that drought just makes the whole issue of growing coffee with this leaf rust in coffee more because it's so heat sensitive. And in fact, when I was in El Paso through an interpreter, I heard firsthand from coffee farmers who were fleeing 3 years of bad crops. They had no choice of their own. They wanted to, went to the cities and then were attacked by gangs, and they just want to work and feed their family. And that's El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. I met farmers from all areas. So as the food insecurity continues to set the stage for instability and violent extremism in regions that we already know are highly vulnerable, can you maybe talk about some of the mitigation that you're doing in some programs or what USAID's doing to help with this global landscape, which is under siege with climate change? Because some of these transformative things that we have in Feed the Future means that we have to start being honest and open and talk about alternative crops.
So for the programs that would help, like the coffee growers and some of these challenges with agriculture, like using different types of techniques for agriculture, that is most definitely a key part of the Feed the Future initiative that's led by the Bureau of Food Security. We're Food for Peace comes into play, we also have a part to play when there's the need for adaptation to change. And that's what we do with our non-emergency development portion of Title II. And as I was saying earlier to the chairwoman, that we are working with the most vulnerable to help them adapt to these changes. So whatever the recurrent shock is, and a lot of times it's from these climate shocks, these droughts, these adverse weather conditions, we're building resilience in those communities. We've been doing it for decades, where we're helping them adapt to those recurrent shocks, to adjust the way that they are living so that they can survive those shocks and continue with their own self-reliance and self-development. It's a keystone piece of what our program does.
Yeah, and Food for Progress is particularly tailored to be able to address some of the challenges you highlighted. I mentioned the Food for Progress program we actually have targeted in the region with the 3 countries, in addition to others you mentioned, on coffee and cacao production. Some of the objectives of that are to increase the productivity, based on the current agronomic conditions they're facing around their production practices, around genetics, and how to improve in drought conditions and other conditions the actual output. That's targeted broadly at a large group of farmers. It also benefits the U.S. based on taking the output of that production and helping the industries here, like our chocolate industry, our coffee industry, based on being able to import the products that they produce there. So it's a very well integrated project, and it's very directed at adopting technology and best practices to improve productivity and to improve stability of the people there that can earn a livelihood based on that production.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Climate change is affecting our farmers here, whether we want to call it extreme weather or whatever, or extreme drought. And if we don't get a handle on it, reducing the amount of carbon in the air, this problem's only going to get worse. I thank you, gentlemen, for your work. I really do. Thank you.
Mr. Fortenberry?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'll try not to give another speech. Back to Haiti, again, was what I call a place-based strategy. And so we take a specific place and we actually can generalize to the principle of what we're talking about. You respond to the emergency need. Years ago, I was an election observer in Haiti, and again, after the massive earthquakes. But the vice president of Haiti told us something that was very fascinating. He said, "You've given us $5 billion. He said, "Thank you. But what we need is direct foreign investment." Now, that term's a bit out of vogue now. But at the same time, the idea is back to what I was saying earlier. Let's envision, for instance, if we took Food for Progress and we had a conversation with the new development finance mechanism at OPIC that comes on the heels of what USAID is doing in terms of going in first, working with NGOs, creating some stability in the midst of an emergency. And you go to southern Haiti, which was devastated, and you see the sides of those mountains and the fullness of potential for coffee production there. And you use the business community's expertise, who are trustworthy there. Now, this is a underlying problem of lack of governance and corruption and on and on. But again, an integrated partnership in solidarity with good people who are going to provide the long-term sustainability so that they can graduate and the actual conditions there will shift. So that each small-scale farmer is then put in type of a community cooperative arrangement underwritten by capital flows, potentially from us, maybe leveraged with the private sector through your program or others, that then is shepherded by USAID, who's on the ground, and our own American Embassy personnel, Foreign Ag Service, that creates a project in 2 to 3 years, first with banana production development, so you're covering your variable costs because that crop comes in quickly, with longer-term crop of coffee coming because the banana can grow underneath the coffee plant. So this is all and then you take that model, once it works, and scale it across regions that have this particular type of production opportunity or others. This is the type of thing we're talking about when we're looking for a spectrum of of who's doing what and where, and what can we do to innovate around it. Mark Greene and I have had this same conversation. I'd like to have it with you in terms of the potential of Food for Progress, as well as OPIC's New Development Initiative, because this is what I want to get to. In my time, however long it is here, what is the architecture of what we are doing now, which seems to be very, very good, but what gaps are there potentially? Other international partners who are doing certain things, other international partners who are claiming rights to ownership of this space but aren't doing anything, as I mentioned, the Chinese, and on and on. This is the broader conversation that I want to continue with you all. All right, I'm going to stop and let you guys respond to everything I've been saying. Trey, you haven't, or Director Hicks, you haven't had a chance.
Yeah, so I actually would love to respond. In Haiti, it's one of the places where we are working.
Remember, it's a place-based strategy. It's a specific that's generalizable to the principle. That's what I want to keep doing.
Correct. So there's very specific contextual issues in Haiti that we're responding to, but we're changing the way we respond to the emergency in a way that better links to the resilience and the development side. And so what we're doing is if we're providing food, we're going to do a food for asset kind of project where we give folks food, but we have them work on an asset for the community that can be used in a development context. Feed the Future can come in behind us, use those assets to then build resilience and get them on that self-development.
Okay, how's that reconcilable with Food for Progress option?
Well, yeah, we can certainly build that program, and we put Haiti on, and again, in communication coordination with USAID as a priority country from Governor Dole, and just awarded fiscal year 2019 a new project to do school feeding in Haiti to kind of bring on that midterm support for Haiti, not the immediate emergency relief, but the longer-term sustainability. We can certainly look at Food for Progress in the same context to build on to what's already there and address the capacity in the crops you mentioned. We're very attuned to doing that.
So once I get this report back, it's going to come to you guys as well in this committee, and we're going to continue this conversation about the continuum of support mechanisms here and throughout the world, what we do well, what gaps we might be able to identify, how we can become more effective. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We welcome that. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Isley, Mr. Hicks, you each have programs where success can be defined in a number of ways. Mr. Isley, I think Mr. Hicks has given an excellent example, but can you just tell us, well, both of you can, how you determine when a country should be graduated from your programs when they've achieved a level of self-reliance that removes the need for the programs to continue? And of course, Mr. Isley, if you want to give us an example of success story, we'd appreciate that.
Certainly, and as indicated before and in the written and oral testimony, graduation is a key component as we go into the programs in the beginning and as we work with the implementing partners. Of course, each of the programs that we implement have specific selection criteria, so the countries would need to continue to meet that selection criteria or fall outside of it in terms of whether they would get new programming. Take McGovern Dole, for example, in school feeding. We work very closely with local government and even country government in terms of taking over those programs. The things we do to ensure the graduation is to ensure that the laws and regulations are in place that enable them to take over the programs and to ensure they do what you all do, and that's appropriate the necessary money and have the ability to actually take over the school feeding from us. A recent example in Laos, which we're in transition for the government to take over, was we brought a group over to the U.S. under our Cochrane program and provided that education here in the U.S. on how to transition that programming back to the country. Recent example of success, and was mentioned in the materials, was Kenya, where over 4,000 schools that we've supported have now been taken over by the Kenyan government, again with our assistance and support in that transition.
Well, I provided a specific example, but I think a response that would maybe get to what both of you guys are looking at right now. We, at Food for Peace, we don't have anything on autopilot. We are constantly assessing. Basically, every year we do a zero-based budget when it comes to our response. We are constantly looking at the data. We have the famine early warning system. We have staff on the ground. We're looking at rainfall. We're looking at purchasing power. We're looking at all the things that goes into food insecurity. And if the data doesn't show there's a need, we're not going to give humanitarian assistance to folks that don't have a demonstrated need. So we're constantly shifting. So there are countries that graduate. There are countries that get on the dole. All we're doing is looking at the data. And the second that we provide assistance to folks that don't have a need, it's no longer humanitarian. So we take the data-driven approach very seriously. So, it's not on autopilot, and we're constantly looking at if there's an area that had drought but doesn't have a need in this year, we're not going to fund that area.
Well, Mr. Isley and Mr. Hicks, I'd like to thank you both for being here today. I know there are a few things on which you're going to get back to us on, and I think you will be submitted some questions that you can get back. I think Mr. Cuellar wanted some additional information, and we will forward additional questions to you for the record, and we would appreciate your diligence in getting responses back to us as quickly as you can. But again, we'd like to thank you, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to make sure that these programs and American generosity is administered effectively and efficiently around the world. With that, we thank you, and the subcommittee is adjourned.